Kgosi Nyalala Pilane is the Deputy President of Contralesa. He joins us now from Sea Point Studios. Thank you so much for joining us, Kgosi Pilane. Let's just start with some of the disquiet that members of Contralesa put out there to the President yesterday during his address at the opening there. Do you feel, just holistically looking at the coexistence of democratic institutions and traditional rule, that these two institutions are working together? Is there hope?
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and good evening to your viewers. I think nothing is impossible. We really have to come up with a solution that is more suitable to South Africa. We cannot expect to have the solution that is only applicable and suitable to the Western in Europe, and we don't design and come up with a solution that is more acceptable and accommodative to all of us in South Africa.
So what do you see as the major underlying problem? Is it legislative?
Well, there's a wide range of those issues that needs to be addressed, and of course legislative is one of the directives, because it's the one that gives regulation or directive for how we interact with each other. So yes, the regulations, the legislation would definitely be part of the main issue.
So what do you think was the main problem? How all of this was envisioned when we were looking at democratic reforms and the Traditional Leaders Act? What should have been done?
Well, from the onset, we have been, as traditional leaders, been indicating to our counterparts in politics and government that the Constitution did not cover the institution enough to continue providing services to its communities. And that is where the main problem lies. And that's where we think if the Constitution can be properly amended in order to accommodate the role and functions of the traditional leaders.
Is the problem that there is overlap, or is it lack of clarity? I'm just thinking now with the issue of mining rights, which was raised there by Contralesa, and obviously there's now a constitutional amendment being looked at with regards to the issue of land.
Yeah, well, the constitutional amendment bill only focuses on the land issue, and we are saying within the same constitution, if you can look at the chapters that identifies and clarifies the role and function of all other institutions, the traditional leadership is the only smallest portion of the constitution which did not give clarity as to how it's going to be regulated properly.
So that's why I was asking Kgosi Pilane if the problem is overlap or lack of clarity. For instance, when you talk about community development, how do you see your role, and how do you see the role of government as an instrument of that, of governance?
The institution of traditional leadership has from time immemorial been always at the forefront of the development of their own areas and their own communities. And we feel that function still belongs to the institution, because we cannot rely on municipalities only. We needed to be given the space to also participate and ensure that we develop according to our customs, because that's another area where we found some conflicting interest. The way things are done, it's only according to the Western view, and they disregard how we used to work.
And I'm glad you raised the issue of customs, because there are those who are then critical of traditional leadership and how they sometimes conduct themselves, say that there must be an acceptance that you know, it evolves. So that would also mean looking at, if we just look at the true sense of the meaning traditional, it refers to indigenous. So is there a way of perhaps re-looking at what we consider as those customs and how traditional leaders approach presiding over, if you would like to see it, as their communities?
Well, maybe we should clarify the issue of the notion of the name traditional leaders. I mean, we have not been traditional leaders. That is why even in all these legislations, you talk of royal families. But when you get to the person who is now assigned by the royal family, is no longer a royal leader, it becomes a traditional leader. So I don't think really we need to focus more on the interpretation of the traditional leader. It's a royal leader. But coming back to what you're saying regarding it has to be traditional and tradition has to evolve. Yes, we agree. And that is why we have also accepted that in the traditional council, the current traditional councils, there is portion, 40% that is appointed or elected by the community. And I don't think that does not indicate our willingness that the tradition should evolve.
But Kgosi Pilane, is the ethos still the same? Do traditional leaders still see themselves as serving the people, being servants of the people, not necessarily people being their servants?
I beg your pardon?
I'm asking about the ethos behind it. Do traditional leaders see themselves as being servants of the people rather than people being their servants?
No, basically traditional leaders are servants of the people. They are there to serve their communities.
So you would have to serve communities
that has always been.
So you would have to serve communities that buy into the whole philosophy of traditional leadership. So let's look at issues such as circumcision. We've seen that there's been a major fallout sometimes between communities and traditional leaders on the issue of circumcision, preventing young men from dying. So is it a problem of people not really deferring much to traditional leadership, or is there perhaps a misunderstanding on who should play what role between traditional leaders and communities?
Yeah, well, the issue of circumcision is completely misconstrued, because where the traditional leaders are at the forefront of this institution, there's not much problems. But this institution of circumcision schools, it has been invaded by unscrupulous people, and unfortunately we have a problem of law enforcement, and everybody can do whatever he wants, and unfortunately, because it is aligned to the traditional leadership, everybody thinks it's because of the traditional leaders.
And what I'm purely raising here is the extent of your authority. You know, how much power do you still yield as traditional leadership? We go back to the issue of relevance.
Well, I indicated in the beginning that the Constitution has actually clipped our powers and function, and that's where we are saying it needs to be reviewed, it needs to be amended so that it allows us to practice properly how we used to do things.
All right, thank you so much for joining us and speaking to us. Kgosi Nyalala Pilane, the Deputy President of Contralesa, in our parliamentary studios there.